Tower of Fantasy was an MMO action role-playing gacha game released in 2022 as the first big-name competitor looking to take a bite out of the formerly known MiHoYo and their trailblazing success of Genshin Impact. The game itself also just so happened to be the first failed Genshin killer despite being the first to strike while the iron was hot. An uninteresting story, lifeless world, time-gated exploration, and a severe, and I mean severe, lack of polish across the board kept the game from standing on its own two legs as the Paimon yap-infested kingpin of the gacha space would continue onward unchallenged as TOF faded into obscurity, and Hoda Studio, the company behind that game, would take the nonetheless fat financial bank they made from TOF and begin work on Neverness to Everness. And unfortunately for them again, probably suffer the same fate as they step into the ring with the No Man's Sky hype levels of an anime GTA clone that is Ananta from the NetEase-backed studio Naked Rain. So I just came up with an amazing idea, guys. If you capital G gamers want the real-time strategy genre to come back in a big way, just ask Hoda Studio to make an RTS game, and another developer team will probably come out of left field again with a real banger that will revive the entire genre. Just saying. To get back on track here, while Tower of Fantasy itself is incredibly unremarkable by today's ever-evolving gacha gaming standards, there was one thing that TOF had going for itself that ended up accidentally resolving the long-standing debate of waifu over meta. As a quick recap so everyone's on the same page, waifu over meta is a common phrase within the gacha social media circles to refer to individuals or groups making decisions in what characters to invest their gacha pools and resources into, either for their own personal love for the character or their performance in primarily endgame content modes. A player's own personal attachment to their favorite character is one of the primary motivating reasons for why conversations of power creep and older unit viability is so prevalent in the gacha space. In the event that a character starts to fall off in performance, you're only really left with a few options. Hyper-invest into the character by acquiring additional copies, signature weapons, or grind for better gear. The former two of those are the most inaccessible to most players, as they either don't have the premium currency at their disposal to hyper-invest in the event that they're looking onward to other new characters, or the character's banner in question is not available to pull on to begin with. And as for the third, I hope we can all understand how long and frustrating gear grinding can be for many. Pull and invest for in new supports. This isn't something particularly new, as you should be pulling for supports in the first place anyway. However, in the event that a player needs to continue to pull for newer and newer supports to replace older ones to keep a character relevant, you are effectively just doing whatever you can to keep a weaker unit on life support when you would have just been better off replacing the character in question anyway. The last option I want to bring up is to hold out for the game developers to buff your favorite character. By far the best solution that sees fan favorites get the much needed tender loving care from those whom have the actual tools to do so and not come at the expense of the player. So of course, this one almost never happens unless the community raises absolute hell for it. Unless your girl's frontline. So the gist is, players are left with a situation where they are compelled to pull for newer units to keep up with endgame content, but would be heavily demotivated from continuing to play the game should they have to bench their favorite character, potentially forever, in the event that they get left behind in the meta. What did Tower of Fantasy do to address this? Simple. In Tower of Fantasy, players have a single, playable character they can equip up to 3 weapons with. Each of these weapons are owned by a playable character in the game. You also have what is called Simulacra, which allows you to equip any playable character for your main avatar as you play the game independent of your weapon choices. Equipping no Simulacra will simply have you play as your custom character you made at the beginning of the game. How do you acquire Simulacra? You simply have to own the weapon of the character in question, and said weapons are what you pull for on Tower of Fantasy's banners. In one sentence, when you pull a new SSR weapon in TOF, you're given an equipable player skin of the character who owns that weapon. If you pull for the Vermilion Bird, you can play as Lan without needing to use the Vermilion Bird in combat. If you pull for Shadow Weave, you can play as Lin. If you pull for Onyx Tortoise, you can play as Ming Jing. so on and so forth. The only difference players get out of using characters with their own personal weapons is a different perspective or even animation change when casting an ultimate. That is it. Otherwise, you are free to mix and match characters and weapons to whatever your desire to fully customize your own experience. This very simple, deep coupling of a character's weapon from being intrinsically tied to them has single-handedly become a near-perfect solution to the long-standing problem players have had with gacha games when the looming threat of their waifus or husbandos becoming irrelevant starts to rear its ugly head. I say near perfect because pulling for newer weapons to replace older ones does inevitably mean you need to give up the playstyle or feel of the older weapon to maintain meta relevance. So if there was a really cool weapon you liked the feel or look of, you'll sadly still have to say goodbye to the weapon if you choose to not vertically invest into it with more banner pulls. Despite this shortcoming of the system, it is still by far the best solution we have had up to this point for the handling of older characters. While I personally did not find Tower Fantasy to be the thrilling experience Hoda Studios were hoping it would be, I at least enjoyed my time with it nonetheless. A big contributing factor was of course the ability to play my favorite character, Tsubasa, a standard SSR Ice DPS whom I can run around with in-game without having to worry about her bow's viability, as I could just not use the bow and still enjoy Tsubasa. It amazes me to this day that no other big name gacha has lifted this system wholesale and used this as a massive advantage they could have over the current competition to get people to play their game over someone else's. So long as gacha systems continue to be a primary source of monetization for these games, we need to see some innovations that can help to lift the frustration and fatigue these systems bring along with them if future gacha games want a piece of this ever-shrinking pie. And while this little David over here missed their mark on the Goliath of Genshin Impact, let us not completely forget some of the remarkable ideas they've had along the way.